Hi, welcome back. Well, how does your church go with worship? It's certainly been an area of conflict in a lot of churches, but also, I guess, a source of great comfort and great inspiration. And here to talk to us about worship this morning is Nicholas Zork. How are you, Nick?
Good.
So Zork, that's an interesting surname. Does that put you from another planet or something? Or?
Yeah. I don't like to talk about it too much. It's a little spooky, but no. I think my great-grandparents, or even the generation before, were immigrants to the U.S., and I'm sure it was a longer name that they shortened, so there's not a lot of us around. But,
so probably from Eastern Europe or Germany or something like that. Well, there you go. Well, it's a great name, Nicholas Zork.
Thanks.
Good to have a name with a Z in it, I reckon.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. I don't mind having an odd name.
So Nicholas, you're working in New York, helping out an Adventist church there in the area of worship. I mean, most churches manage to organise, worship sort of, themselves without paying someone. What extra value do you add to the worship experience at that church in Manhattan?
Well, yeah, no, that's a good question. So, sometimes I wonder what extra value I add, because we have so many great folks in the church, and they were sort of very successfully, leading the worship ministry before I got there. But one of the things that we do is we just try to make the worship service a space and time, a community gathering where people can connect with one another, where people have the opportunity to connect possibly with God. For us, that's our primary time when we're all gathered together as a church community, and it's one of the primary times when our doors are open and we welcome everyone. So for us, really, it's an opportunity to meet one another and to meet God. There's a great line I read in a book. It said that worship is not about meaning so much as it is about meeting one another, meeting God.
Okay, not about meaning so much as meeting. Wow.
Yeah, there's plenty of meaning too, but we get so, I think, focused sometimes on meaning, about what we're saying, what we're trying to say, that we forget to really meet one another in the diversity that we are, and learn from one another. And that in that openness to one another, I think we can be open to God and to learning from God as well. So
now, often, Nick, when we talk about worship, we use it as a synonym for music. We say, oh, the worship leader this week is such and such. By that we mean this person is leading out in a couple of songs. But the definition of worship is much bigger, isn't it?
Yeah, I think ultimately worship is an embodied attitude. All the words for worship in the Bible are, things that we do, kneeling, bowing. They're things that we do with our bodies that connote a certain attitude. And I think when we do that together, we're embodying an attitude of recognizing God's worth, also an attitude of openness to God.
Because worship comes from the word worth, doesn't it?
Yeah, so ascribing worth is part of it. But I also think that that comes really from worship, the Old English word. But the main Hebrew word is a word that really just means to lie down prostrate. Now, we don't do that a lot in my church. That's done in some churches. But I think it's that kind of embodied attitude of humility, of honoring God, of humble service to one another. So it's all different ways to say, God, you are worthy. God, you are to be praised. Is that what worship is about? Essentially, different ways of communicating that to God? Yeah,
or am I oversimplifying?
No, I think it is that. I think it's also it's an entire orientation. It's a different way of being in the world. And when we gather together, we can honoring God, orienting ourselves toward God. God, the one who's holy, the one who is the ultimate other. I think that also changes the way that we live toward all the others around us. So I think worship is really a way of life. It's a different way of being in the world as a community in which we're orientated not toward ourselves, but toward God. And in being oriented toward God, we're also oriented toward God's priorities, which is everyone in this world.
Okay. So Nick, you've come halfway around the world to Australia for the Manifest Festival to talk about worship. So, I mean, most of us who go to church, most weeks know or think we know what worship looks like. What are you offering here in Australia, or how are you challenging people at that Manifest Festival to think about worship differently, to practice worship differently? Like, what are you bringing to the table?
Well, I think oftentimes we think in terms of worship as being a presentation. We think from the perspective of those of us who are up front anyway, and who are planning, think of worship from the perspective of the platform.
A performance, essentially.
Right, yeah. Exactly. And I really want to encourage folks, and I try to encourage myself and our team back in New York, to think from the perspective of the pew, to think from the perspective of the one who's gathered, because really it is a participatory event, first and foremost. And it's a participatory event in which we're becoming immersed in a story that's bigger than all of us, but a story that also involves all of us. So it's a worship really is, I think, this time where we are weaving sort of all of our human stories as individuals, as a community, as a world, into a divine story of redemption through Christ. And it's in that kind of that interweaving, that entering into that narrative, that I think we can find hope and healing. It can bring people coming from different places together as we recognize that we're all part of one story. So I think, but if we don't think about how we are participating and how we're facilitating participation, it can just be a presentation.
Well, give me some practical examples, Nicholas. I mean, okay, because what you're saying sounds good sort of in theory, but what does participatory worship actually look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would just, as a musician, I would break it down even sometimes to very specific aesthetic things. You know, there are ways that I sing if I'm just giving a concert. And I sing, you know, in churches, but, you know, most of the time, actually, I sing in music venues and theaters and things outside of church. And if I'm singing and people are meant to listen, I sing in a certain way. I sing in keys that are good for my voice. I play in ways that might be, well, I'm hoping that they're interesting to listen to, maybe surprising rhythms. Maybe,
rather than easy to sing along with.
Right, maybe it's unpredictable in some way. I think if participation is the goal, it's just a different set of aesthetic values. You know, we try to choose songs and keys that everyone can sing. We try to sing a version of a song that is rhythmically predictable. Yeah, there's still surprises, but we don't want to lose folks.
Yeah, that's music, but we've just been talking about how worship is much larger than music. How do we make other aspects of the church service more participatory? The prayer, what else?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is something. First of all, I'll tell you what we don't do at our church every week. We don't change the order of service drastically every week.
Okay.
Because that makes for a very interesting program. But if every week everything's all mixed up, it becomes very difficult to participate. And we like to involve a lot of different folks in leading out, in praying, in reading scriptures.
So there's a predictability to it.
Yeah, there's sort of a rhythm that people have learned so that they can easily jump in and tell a story, jump in and read a scripture, jump in and offer a prayer, because they know where they're at. We're not sort of, if you change everything, it makes it very hard to involve a lot of people. And we like to involve as many people as possible in leading out from up front. But also, we like to create space in the service when actually nothing's happening much on the platform. You know, sometimes we will sing a simple refrain and then just leave a space of silence.
Wow, time to listen.
Yeah, where people can listen, where people can bring their own prayers, where we sort of recognize that the essential thing that happens when we gather isn't what's happening into a microphone. The essential thing that happens is what's happening as a community gathered in the presence of God.
And what's happening in people's hearts, I guess.
Yeah, and you have to, if we don't create space for that, then the message that we're sending non-verbally is that, in fact, what matters most is what's happening on the platform, what's happening in the mic.
Wow. Oh, it's a real change in perspective. Thanks so much for your time today, Nicholas. And I understand you have a website if people want to follow what you're doing.
Just my name, nicholaszork.com, and I try to post the things I'm doing up there, the music that I do in churches, and the music that I do in other community venues. So yeah,
great. All right,
it's a good place to find me.
We'll check that out, nicholaszork.com, and we'll see you after the break. Thanks.